The subway station pulsed with the familiar rhythm of a New York morning. The air was thick with the mingling scents of fresh coffee, damp concrete, and the faint traces of newspaper ink. Businessmen in sharp suits hurried past, their leather shoes clicking against the tiled floor. College students, earbuds in, stood in clusters, lost in their own worlds. A mother struggled to keep her young child close as the crowd ebbed and flowed like a restless tide. The PA system crackled, announcing the next inbound train, its robotic voice barely cutting through the buzz of the station. Ryan Carter stood near the platform's edge, a cup of coffee in one hand, phone in the other. He wasn't in a rush. Not today. As a freelance journalist, his schedule was flexible, dictated more by the stories he found than by office hours. His eyes drifted across the station, instinctively scanning for something unusual, something worth paying attention to. Then he saw it. A German shepherd. Alone. Ryan's grip on his coffee tightened slightly. A stray? No, not quite. The dog wasn't wandering, wasn't sniffing at discarded food wrappers or eyeing passing commuters for a scrap of kindness. It moved with purpose, navigating the busy platform with an ease that suggested familiarity. No leash, no collar, no hesitation. Ryan followed its gaze. The train. The moment the door slid open with a mechanical hiss, the dog stepped forward, not cautiously, not like an animal uncertain of its surroundings, but with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. The crowd surged around it, but the shepherd weaved through effortlessly, ignoring the press of bodies, stepping onto the train as if it belonged there. Ryan hesitated. A stray wouldn't do that. For a fleeting moment, he expected someone to call out, a whistle, a name, any sign that this dog wasn't actually alone. But no one did. The passengers boarded, the doors slid shut, and the train pulled away. Ryan blinked. Had he really just seen that? Another train was arriving in 2 minutes. He could go about his day, let it go, dismiss it as a quirky city moment. But his gut told him otherwise. There was a story here, and as any good journalist knew, when your gut spoke, you listened. He adjusted his bag, stepped forward, and boarded the next train. The train rocked gently as it sped through the underground tunnels, the rhythmic hum of metal against metal filling the space. Ryan stood a few feet away from the shepherd, watching. The dog, Murphy, as Ryan would later learn, sat near a pole, paws planted firmly on the floor, ears flicking occasionally at the sounds of the subway. But it wasn't tense. It wasn't restless. It just waited. Ryan frowned. Strays didn't just sit still like that. A true stray would be on edge, scanning for danger, for an exit, for food. But Murphy was different. His body was relaxed, but his eyes were focused, watching the doors, as if anticipating something. Ryan glanced around the car. No one else seemed remotely interested. A man in a navy suit was flipping through his newspaper. A teenager was hunched over a laptop, and an elderly woman adjusted the large purse on her lap. Had they seen this dog before? Ryan checked his phone, pretending to scroll through emails while keeping Murphy in his peripheral vision. Where was it going? Who was waiting for it? The train slowed. Murphy's ears perked. Ryan felt the shift immediately. The dog's body tensed just slightly, a flicker of anticipation passing through it. Then, as soon as the doors slid open, Murphy rose without hesitation and stepped off the train. Ryan followed. The platform here was quieter, a stark contrast to the chaos of downtown. The morning crowd was thinner, an elderly man reading a newspaper on a bench, a jogger adjusting his shoelaces. A street musician strummed a slow melody on his guitar, his open case scattered with a few dollar bills. Murphy didn't pause. He moved through the station's exit like he had done this 100 times before. Ryan quickened his pace, staying a few feet behind. This wasn't just some random wandering. This was routine. As soon as they stepped onto the sidewalk, Ryan expected the dog to hesitate, to sniff the air, to choose a direction. But Murphy didn't need to think. He already knew. Ryan's pulse quickened. What was this dog doing? They walked for a few blocks. The streets here were quieter, lined with small businesses, cafes, a bookstore, a laundromat with its neon open sign flickering slightly. And then, Murphy slowed. Ryan immediately noticed the shift in his body language. The German Shepherd stopped in front of a narrow side street, one that led to an older part of the neighborhood. It was quieter here, the kind of street most people walked past without a second thought. But Murphy wasn't just passing through. He was waiting. Ryan's breath caught. He stepped back, keeping his distance. Murphy sat down, right there, on the corner, looking down the street with the kind of patience that suggested expectation. Like he was waiting for someone to arrive, or for someone who never came back. Ryan swallowed hard. Was this where his owner lived? Had he been abandoned here? Or, worse, was he coming back for someone who was already gone? Murphy stayed still. His ears flicked at passing sounds, but his eyes never left that empty stretch of road. Minutes passed. Then, as suddenly as he had stopped, Murphy stood up and turned away. Ryan tensed. The dog didn't seem disappointed. Just resigned. Like he had been here before. Like he had waited here before. Like he would wait again tomorrow. Ryan exhaled, a lump forming in his throat. What had this dog lost? And more importantly, was he still hoping to find it? The journalist in him knew. This wasn't a random event. This was a story, and Ryan was about to follow it. Ryan had always trusted his instincts, and right now they were screaming at him to keep following this dog. He had started the day expecting nothing more than his usual commute, just another morning in the unrelenting flow of New York City. But now he found himself stepping deeper into something unexplainable. Murphy, the German Shepherd, had captured his curiosity in a way that very few things ever had. A dog riding the subway alone was already strange. But the way Murphy moved with purpose, the way he waited at each stop like he knew exactly where he was going, that was something else entirely. Ryan glanced at his watch. He had articles to write, emails to answer, an editor probably waiting for his response. But none of that mattered. Not now. He had to know the truth. Taking a deep breath, he followed. Murphy stepped off the train without hesitation, his paws landing on the platform with practiced ease. Ryan trailed a few steps behind, trying to act casual, though his heart was racing. The station was quieter than the bustling downtown stops, the kind of place where people moved at a slower pace. The morning rush had already passed, leaving behind only a few scattered commuters. A woman clutching a grocery bag, an old man adjusting his coat, a teenager lost in his music. Murphy didn't stop to take in his surroundings. He knew exactly where he was going. Ryan picked up his pace, following the dog through the station exit and out onto the sidewalk. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fresh bread from a bakery down the street. This part of town had a different feel, not abandoned, but quieter, older. The buildings had seen decades pass, their facades worn but sturdy. The streets weren't completely empty, but there was a noticeable lack of the frantic energy that pulsed through the city's heart. Murphy walked with confidence, his paws clicking softly against the pavement. He turned a corner. Ryan hesitated for just a second before following. A small park stretched out before them, nestled between two old brick buildings. It wasn't the kind of park tourists visited. No grand fountains, no sprawling green spaces. Just a handful of trees, a paved walkway, and a few benches scattered throughout. Murphy headed straight for one of them. Ryan stopped at a distance, watching. The bench was worn, its wooden slats weathered by time and the elements. The kind of bench that had stories. The kind that had seen laughter, whispered conversations, maybe even tears. Murphy sat down in front of it just like he had on the train. And then, he waited. Ryan's throat tightened. The German shepherd wasn't looking around, wasn't scanning for food or attention. He was staring at that bench, waiting. The minutes stretched. Ryan shifted on his feet, his mind racing with questions. Was this where his owner used to meet him? Was this where he had last seen them? Or was he waiting for someone who was never coming back? Ryan ran a hand through his hair. He had covered some strange stories before. People who had spent years searching for loved ones, old mysteries buried beneath time. But this felt different. Murphy let out a quiet breath, his tail resting motionless against the pavement. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he stood up and walked away. Ryan blinked. Just like that? He expected the dog to linger, to hesitate, to show some sign of disappointment. But no. Murphy just turned and moved on, like he had accepted something long ago. Ryan followed. Murphy led him to a small cafe on the corner, the kind of place that had been there forever, its sign slightly faded, the windows fogged from years of warmth and conversation inside. The bell above the door jingled softly as a customer stepped out, letting the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods drift onto the street. Murphy paused outside. His ears twitched, his nose lifted slightly as if catching a familiar scent. Then he walked forward. Ryan barely had time to process what was happening before the cafe door swung open again. A young woman in an apron stepped outside, rubbing her hands on a dish towel. She looked like she had just come from behind the counter, her dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail, flour dusting the sleeve of her uniform. She took a step forward, then stopped. Her eyes landed on Murphy. For a second, something flickered across her face, something between recognition and hesitation. Ryan saw it. Murphy did too. His tail gave the slightest twitch, not a full wag, but something. The woman, Peyton, as Ryan would soon learn, lowered the dish towel. "Hey, buddy," she murmured. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain. Murphy didn't lunge forward, didn't bark. He just stood there, waiting. Ryan's pulse quickened. She knew the dog. Not just in passing. She knew him. Peyton looked around suddenly, as if realizing someone else was watching. Her eyes landed on Ryan, and for the briefest moment she looked guilty. Then, just as quickly, she glanced away, turning back toward the cafe as if nothing had happened. Ryan narrowed his eyes. Why had she reacted like that? If Murphy was just some stray, wouldn't she be surprised? Wouldn't she call for animal control or try to find his owner? But she wasn't surprised. She was hiding something. Ryan took a slow step forward. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice casual. "Do you know this dog?" Peyton's fingers tightened slightly around the dish towel. She hesitated. For a second, Ryan thought she might deny it. Then she sighed. "His name is Murphy," she said quietly. Ryan felt a chill run through him. Murphy. The dog didn't react to hearing his name, but something in his posture shifted, as if it meant something to him. Ryan crouched slightly, studying the shepherd's expression. "Does he have an owner?" he asked. Peyton didn't answer immediately. Then she swallowed. "He used to," she said. Something about the way she said it sent a strange feeling through Ryan's chest. Used to. Ryan glanced at Murphy again. The dog had been riding the subway, going to the same stops, waiting in front of an old bench, repeating the same routine over and over again. And now, someone who knew him was acting like she had seen a ghost. Ryan knew when he was onto something. And this was a story. Ryan could feel the weight of something unspoken hanging between them. Peyton had been about to turn away, back into the cafe, back to whatever safe routine she had built for herself. But Ryan wasn't about to let the moment slip. Not now. Not when he could see the hesitation in her eyes, the flicker of something unresolved just beneath the surface. Murphy sat quietly beside him, his posture still and patient, as if he too was waiting. Ryan took a slow step forward, choosing his words carefully. "You know this dog," he said, his voice even but firm. "Not just in passing. You know him." Peyton's fingers tensed around the dish towel in her hands. She didn't meet his gaze. Instead, she exhaled softly, eyes flicking toward Murphy before settling on a crack in the sidewalk. She hesitated, swallowing hard. "It's been a long time." Ryan studied her. "Since what?" Another pause. She bit her lip, then glanced toward the cafe's open doorway as if debating whether to escape the conversation entirely. But then Murphy moved. Just slightly. Just enough. The German shepherd lifted his head, ears twitching at the sound of her voice, and for the briefest moment, there was something in his expression. Recognition. Peyton saw it too, and just like that, her resolve cracked. She let out a slow, shaky breath and looked up at Ryan, her eyes clouded with something deeper than hesitation. Something like grief. "You don't understand," she murmured. Ryan crossed his arms. "Then help me understand." For a moment, Peyton didn't speak. She only looked at Murphy, her expression shifting into something distant, like she was sifting through old memories she had tried to bury. Then, at last, she spoke. "Murphy isn't just some stray," she said quietly. "He had a home, a family, a purpose." Ryan remained silent, letting her continue. "He belonged to someone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "His name was Noah." The name hung in the air, weighty and full of unspoken meaning. Ryan felt a prickle at the back of his neck. Noah. Who was he? He asked. Peyton's lips pressed together. "He was a firefighter." Ryan's breath hitched slightly. That explained a lot. The discipline, the purpose in Murphy's movements, the way he never seemed aimless, never acted like a lost dog wandering the streets. He wasn't lost. He was trained. Murphy had been a working dog, a partner. Peyton's gaze drifted downward, toward the shepherd who sat so patiently by Ryan's side. "He wasn't just a pet," she continued. "Murphy was a rescue dog, Noah's partner. They worked together for years." Ryan could see it now. The way Murphy carried himself, the way he navigated through crowds without hesitation, the way he anticipated every stop on the subway like he was following a routine. It all made sense. This wasn't just any dog. Murphy had saved lives. Ryan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "And Noah?" Peyton closed her eyes briefly before shaking her head. "He's gone." A cold weight settled in Ryan's chest. "Gone?" he repeated. "What do you mean?" Peyton swallowed. 3 years ago, there was a fire, an apartment building in the Bronx. A bad one. Ryan didn't move. Peyton continued, her voice softer now, as if the memory itself pained her. "Noah went in with his team. He was always the first one in. He couldn't stand waiting when there were lives on the line. Murphy was with him." Ryan glanced at the dog, who remained still, as if listening. "He saved people that night," Peyton said, voice thick. "But he never came back out." Ryan's stomach twisted. She was talking about Noah like he hadn't made it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Peyton took a deep breath, as if trying to steady herself. "Murphy got out somehow. No one knows exactly how, but when the fire was finally out, the team found his tracking collar at the site, but no sign of Noah." Ryan absorbed this. "And Murphy? He disappeared," she said simply. "No one saw him again after that night. It was like he just vanished." Ryan exhaled. 3 years. For 3 years, this dog had been missing, and yet he had somehow found his way back. Ryan shook his head, trying to piece it together. "And now he's riding the subway, following the same route, stopping at the same places. Why?" Peyton hesitated. "I don't know." Ryan frowned. "Come on," he pressed. "You reacted the moment you saw him. You know something." Peyton's fingers curled around the edge of her apron. She hesitated. Murphy and Noah, they used to come here. Ryan's chest tightened. Of course. That's why Murphy had come straight to the cafe. This place wasn't random. It was familiar. It meant something. Every morning, Peyton went on, before his shift, Noah would stop by. He'd grab a coffee, sit outside with Murphy for a few minutes before heading to the station. Ryan could picture it. A firefighter and his loyal dog. Their routine. Their quiet moments together before rushing into danger. And now, Murphy was still following that same routine, even though Noah was gone. Ryan swallowed hard. It was as if Murphy was retracing his steps over and over, looking for something, someone, who wasn't there anymore. But why now? Why had he returned after all this time? Ryan looked at Peyton. 3 years is a long time, he said. Why do you think he came back? She shook her head. I don't know. Ryan frowned. Murphy had disappeared the night of the fire. No one had seen him since. And yet, just recently, he had started showing up again. Why? Ryan's journalist instincts flared. This wasn't just a story about a lost dog. Something bigger was happening. Noah was declared missing, not confirmed gone. And Murphy? Murphy was searching. Ryan's pulse quickened. What if Murphy wasn't just repeating an old routine? What if he was following a trail that led back to Noah? Ryan exhaled. He had started the day thinking he had found a mystery. Now, he realized, he was in the middle of something much, much bigger, and he was about to find out the truth. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the edge of something big. Murphy wasn't just any lost dog. He wasn't wandering aimlessly through the city looking for scraps or shelter. He was following a pattern, a routine, and patterns, in Ryan's experience, always meant something. After everything Peyton had told him, that Murphy had once belonged to Noah, a firefighter who had gone missing in a blaze 3 years ago, Ryan was certain that this wasn't just about a loyal dog retracing his steps. Murphy was searching for something, or someone. Ryan glanced down at the German shepherd, who sat calmly beside him on the sidewalk, watching the city with sharp, observant eyes. Whatever was driving Murphy, it wasn't random, and Ryan intended to find out exactly where this journey led. That night, Ryan sat in his apartment, staring at the small GPS tracker resting in his palm. It was a simple device, compact, lightweight, the kind used by pet owners to keep track of their animals. A journalist friend had given it to him years ago, a leftover gadget from an investigative piece on tracking technology. Ryan had tossed it into a drawer and forgotten about it, until now. He clipped the tracker onto Murphy's collar the next morning. The shepherd didn't react, didn't even seem to notice. He just watched Ryan, tilting his head slightly, as if sensing that something had changed. "Let's see where you really go," Ryan murmured. Murphy trotted off like he always did, weaving through the morning crowds, slipping into the familiar rhythm of his routine. But this time, Ryan didn't follow. This time, he would let the GPS do the work. Hours later, Ryan sat in a corner booth of a coffee shop, his laptop open in front of him, eyes locked onto the GPS tracking software. Murphy's movements appeared as a blinking dot on the digital map, tracing a path through the city. At first, it was exactly as Ryan expected. The shepherd went to the park first, the same bench, the same motionless waiting. Then, after some time, he moved to the cafe, pausing at the entrance before continuing his journey. But then, something changed. Murphy didn't linger around the usual locations today. Instead, he took a different path. Ryan's pulse quickened. He leaned in closer to the screen. Murphy was heading out of the city. His route weaved through side streets, avoiding main roads, before stretching into an industrial district on the outskirts of town. Ryan's fingers tightened around his coffee cup. "What the hell is out there?" he muttered. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Peyton answered on the second ring. "I need you to come with me," Ryan said, already grabbing his coat. There was a pause. Where? Peyton asked, wariness in her voice. Ryan glanced back at his screen, at the blinking dot that had stopped moving, right in the middle of what looked like an abandoned lot. A place I think Murphy's been going to for a while now, he said. There was another pause. Then, I'll meet you outside the cafe in 10 minutes. The drive out of the city was quiet, the tension thick between them. Peyton sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, watching the buildings blur past. She hadn't asked many questions when she climbed into the car, but Ryan could tell her mind was racing. Finally, she spoke. You think he's been going somewhere other than the cafe and the park? Ryan nodded, gripping the wheel. Yeah, and we're about to find out where. They turned onto a cracked, narrow road, leading toward a cluster of old industrial buildings, their walls faded with time, windows dark and empty. Peyton sat up straighter. This place looks abandoned. Ryan checked the tracker again. That's what I thought too. He pulled the car over near a rusted chain-link fence. Beyond it, an old brick building loomed in the fading daylight. The fire station emblem was still faintly visible above the garage doors, its paint chipped and worn. Peyton inhaled sharply. This was Noah's station, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan's head snapped toward her. What? She nodded, swallowing hard. This was where he worked. Ryan turned back to the building, his heart pounding. Murphy had been coming here. Again and again. Ryan unlatched the gate, pushing it open with a creak. Inside the fence, weeds had grown through the cracks in the pavement. An old fire truck, long abandoned, sat in the garage bay, its tires deflated, its frame rusting under years of neglect. And then, Ryan saw it. A makeshift den nestled between two wooden pallets near the side of the building, a spot just big enough for a dog to sleep in. Murphy had been living here. Peyton covered her mouth. Oh my God. Ryan crouched, brushing his fingers over an old, empty water bowl. A tattered blanket was folded neatly nearby, dust-covered but unmistakably placed there with care. Murphy hadn't been wandering the city. He had a home. Here. But why? What was he waiting for? Ryan straightened, his gaze shifting toward the fence. Something metallic caught his eye. He stepped forward, and his breath hitched. A dog collar tangled in the rusted links of the fence. It was old, its leather cracked and weathered from years of exposure. But the nameplate was still visible. Noah and Murphy, partners. Peyton let out a soft, choked sound. Ryan reached for it carefully, untangling the strap from the metal wiring. Murphy must have worn this before he disappeared, Peyton whispered. Ryan's jaw tightened, which means he was here, after the fire. That alone was enough to send his mind spiraling. Had Murphy come looking for Noah back then? Had he found something that no one else did? Ryan turned back toward the building, scanning the boarded-up windows. Something didn't feel right. There was more to this. And then he saw the photograph. It was wedged in the corner of a broken window, the edges curled from time and weather, the image faded but still visible. Ryan pulled it free. It was a photo of Noah, standing in front of the station, a broad grin on his face. Murphy sat at his side, ears perked, his tail wagging in the frozen moment. But Ryan's eyes weren't on Noah. They were on the woman standing next to him. Peyton leaned in, her eyes widening. Who is that? Ryan shook his head slowly. I don't know, he murmured. But he was going to find out. Because something told him that whoever she was part of the reason Murphy was still here. And maybe, just maybe, part of the reason Noah never came home. Ryan couldn't let it go. Finding the fire station had only opened more questions than answers. The old collar tangled in the fence, the makeshift shelter where Murphy had been staying, and most of all, the photograph. Noah was supposed to be gone. The world had mourned him. But that photo suggested there was more to the story. And the woman standing next to him? She was the missing piece. Ryan knew there was only one way to get the truth: find someone who knew Noah. Over the next few days, Ryan dug into everything he could find. He contacted old colleagues of Noah's, former firefighters who had worked alongside him before the tragedy. Most of them had the same reaction when Ryan mentioned his name: a long pause, a deep sigh, a shake of the head. Noah had been one of the best, brave, fearless, the kind of man who never hesitated to run into a burning building if it meant saving lives. But after that night, after the fire that took him away, he was never seen again. Everyone assumed he had been lost in the blaze. There was no confirmed body, but the wreckage had been so severe that there wasn't much left to find. The department held a memorial. His name was engraved on a plaque honoring fallen heroes. End of story. Except it wasn't, because Murphy was still searching for him. And then finally, Ryan found a lead. It came from one of Noah's oldest friends, a retired fire chief named James Holloway. The man had been hesitant at first, unwilling to revisit ghosts from the past. But when Ryan mentioned Murphy, something shifted. "You found his dog?" Holloway asked, his voice rough with age and something else: guilt. "He was never lost," Ryan corrected. "He's been riding the subway for 3 years, retracing his steps, looking for Noah." Silence. Then the old man exhaled. "Noah's alive," he said. Ryan's breath caught. "What?" "He left," Holloway murmured. "After the fire, after she—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Ryan leaned forward. "She? You mean the woman in the photograph?" Holloway looked away, rubbing a hand over his face. "Her name was Emily. She was Noah's fiancée." Ryan's pulse quickened. "She didn't make it," Holloway continued, voice heavy. "Car accident, just a few months before the fire." Ryan felt a chill crawl up his spine. Noah had lost everything in a matter of months. And then he disappeared. "Where is he now?" Ryan pressed. Holloway hesitated. "I don't know exactly, but I know he didn't go far. He just couldn't face it anymore. Losing Emily broke him. The fire was just the final blow." Ryan swallowed hard. Murphy hadn't just been looking for Noah. He had been looking for the last piece of his family. And Noah? He had walked away from all of it. Ryan and Peyton exchanged a look. "We need to find him," Ryan said. It wasn't easy. Noah had done his best to stay invisible, but in a city like New York, no one ever truly disappears. After 2 days of searching, they finally tracked down a small cabin just outside the city, tucked away near the edge of an old hiking trail. It wasn't much, just a modest structure with a truck parked outside, overgrown grass hinting that the owner didn't entertain visitors often. Ryan's heart pounded as he and Peyton stepped out of the car. Murphy was with them. The dog had been silent for most of the drive, his usual quiet patience now carrying an undercurrent of something else: anticipation. Peyton took a shaky breath. "Are we sure about this?" Ryan looked down at Murphy. "We have to be." They walked toward the cabin. Ryan knocked. Nothing. He knocked again, louder this time. Then, movement inside. The door opened just enough for a man to peer through. His face was thinner than in the photograph, his eyes shadowed with years of something unspoken. His hair was longer, a little grayer at the edges, but there was no mistaking him. Noah. The man frowned, glancing between Ryan and Peyton. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice hoarse from disuse. Ryan swallowed. "Noah," he said carefully. "There's someone here who's been looking for you." He stepped aside. Murphy stood there, motionless. For a moment there was nothing. No reaction. No recognition. Then Murphy's ears twitched. His tail flicked. And suddenly, he was moving. The German shepherd lunged forward, his entire body vibrating with energy, a sound catching in his throat. Not a bark, but a whimper. A desperate, choked whimper. And Noah stumbled back like he had been punched. His breath hitched. "Murphy?" The dog leapt up, paws against Noah's chest, his tail wagging furiously now, pressing his face into the man's shirt, his body trembling with uncontainable emotion. Ryan felt a lump rise in his throat. Murphy remembered. And Noah? Noah had never expected to see him again. The man's hands hovered over the dog's fur as if he was afraid to touch him, afraid this wasn't real. "I thought you were gone," Noah whispered, his voice breaking. Murphy let out another whimper, licking at his hand, his tail still wagging uncontrollably. Noah finally sank to his knees. And then he broke. The dam of emotions he had kept locked away for 3 years shattered in an instant. His arms wrapped around Murphy, his shoulders shaking, his breath coming in uneven gasps. And Murphy just leaned in closer, pressing against him like he had been waiting for this moment forever. Peyton wiped at her eyes. Ryan just watched, heart pounding. This wasn't just a reunion. This was a homecoming. Murphy had never given up. Even when the world told him Noah was gone, even when he had nowhere to go, he had kept searching. And now, at long last, he had found his way back. Noah exhaled, pressing his forehead against Murphy's. "Buddy," he murmured, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry." Murphy let out a soft huff, as if forgiving him instantly. Ryan swallowed hard. He had started this thinking he was following a mystery. Instead, he had found a story about love, loss, and unbreakable loyalty. And as Noah held Murphy close, Ryan knew. This wasn't just the end of a journey. It was the beginning of a second chance. Murphy was finally home. For 3 long years, he had ridden the subway, retracing the same steps, stopping at the same places, waiting for someone who never came. But now, the waiting was over. Noah had returned, but coming home wasn't as simple as just unlocking a door. Noah pulled into the driveway of his small house, the engine humming softly before he shut it off. The house had sat empty for years, untouched, frozen in time just as he had left it. He swallowed hard as he reached for the door handle. Murphy sat in the passenger seat, his deep brown eyes locked onto Noah. He wasn't whining or restless, just watching, as if making sure Noah wouldn't disappear again. Noah sighed. "Come on, buddy," he said quietly. Murphy hesitated only for a second before hopping down from the car, his paws clicking against the pavement. Noah unlocked the front door and pushed it open. Dust motes swirled in the dim light. The house smelled like emptiness, like a place that had been waiting just as long as Murphy had. The dog stepped inside cautiously, sniffing at the air. Then, to Noah's surprise, he walked straight through the living room and into the small corner where his old dog bed still sat, untouched. Murphy paused. The bed was worn, but the scent of his past life still lingered. For a moment, Noah held his breath, waiting to see what Murphy would do. The dog lay down slowly, sighing as he curled into the familiar space. Noah felt his chest tighten. Murphy remembered. And now he was home. At first, things weren't as easy as Noah had imagined. He had spent 3 years running, from his past, from his grief, from himself. Now he was back in the world he had abandoned, trying to fit into a life that had kept moving without him. And Murphy had to learn to trust again. The first few mornings, Noah woke up early to find Murphy sitting near the front door, ears perked, waiting for something. Waiting for the train, waiting for the routine he had followed for years. Noah's heart ached as he crouched beside him. "You don't have to do that anymore," he murmured, scratching Murphy gently behind the ears. "I'm right here, buddy." Murphy leaned into his touch, but his eyes lingered on the door for just a little longer. It would take time. They were both relearning what it meant to have a home. Noah couldn't ignore the weight in his chest, the guilt that gnawed at him every time he looked at Murphy. He had left. He had walked away, believing there was nothing left for him in this world. But Murphy had stayed. He had spent 3 years looking for someone who had given up on being found. One night, Noah sat on the floor beside Murphy's bed, resting his back against the couch. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. Murphy lifted his head, tilting it slightly. "You waited for me," Noah continued, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "Even when I didn't come back, you never gave up." Murphy let out a small huff, shifting closer until his head rested against Noah's leg. A silent reassurance. Noah swallowed hard. Murphy didn't blame him. He had forgiven him the moment they reunited. Maybe it was time for Noah to forgive himself, too. Day by day, things started to change. Murphy stopped waiting at the door. He no longer twitched in his sleep, as if dreaming of searching, running, looking for something just out of reach. Noah began taking him to new places: the beach, the hiking trails, the open fields outside the city. And for the first time in years, Murphy wasn't retracing the past. He was moving forward. So was Noah. He reconnected with old friends, people who thought they had lost him forever. He visited the fire station, paying respects to the place where his life had changed. And every night, when he sat on the porch with Murphy at his feet, watching the world settle into the quiet of evening, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: peace. One evening, after a long walk, Noah settled onto the couch with an old book in his hands. Murphy, instead of going to his bed in the corner, jumped onto the couch beside him, something he had never done before. Noah raised an eyebrow. "You know you have a bed, right?" he teased. Murphy just let out a slow, contented sigh and rested his head against Noah's lap. Noah smiled. It was the final proof. Murphy was no longer waiting for someone to come back, because he knew Noah was already here, and this time, he wasn't leaving. Murphy's story wasn't just about a lost dog searching for his owner. It was about unwavering loyalty. It was about never giving up, even when the world tells you to move on. And for Noah, it was about a second chance, a rare, precious opportunity to make things right. Murphy had waited 3 years. And now, he didn't have to wait anymore. He was finally, truly home. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.